Hey YouTube, Alex Conley here, and I'm joining you guys today from Kyoto, Japan. I'm really happy to be here. I'm actually part Japanese, and this is my first time in Japan. So this is a really exciting visit for me. But today's video is not about Japan, although I will mention it a little bit. Today's video is actually about how can you save money while traveling. So I had a couple of friends ask me for budget tips when traveling and what they can do to kind of cut down on their costs or figure out how are they going to pay for this, right? Traveling can be affordable, it cannot be free. Traveling just simply has costs associated regardless of whether you take a trip in your backyard or halfway around the world. So why don't we go ahead and get into some of these tips. So I'm going to separate my tips by food, drink, and then food and drink. I'll start off with the food tips, and then I'll move on to the drink tips, and then finally I'll have most of my tips being applying to both food and drink. So why don't we go ahead and get right into it. For the first food tip I have, convenience will always cost extra, right? So what do I mean by this? Well, if you're in a situation where the presentation is in a really convenient location, you're going to pay extra. So as an example of this, here in Kyoto, a really popular place to eat is a Kyoto train station. Of course, why is it a popular place to eat? What makes it convenient? Well, that's where most of the people that are coming to Kyoto will travel in or out of. There's no airport in Kyoto, so people will typically be riding on one of the many trains from primarily from Osaka to come up here to visit, and when they get there they might be hungry. Maybe they flew into Osaka and directly took the train up here. And so there's all these different restaurants that you can enjoy and have and try in Kyoto. And so that's a popular place to eat. But when you go and check out these restaurants, they're all pretty expensive. Like all the restaurants in Kyoto Station, you're going to spend at least 1,500 yen. In most of them, maybe there's a few that'll offer meals for 1,000 to 1,200 yen, but most of the meals I saw were 1,500 yen and up, and you can spend as much as 20,000, 25,000 yen on a meal at Kyoto Station, and this is because it's just a really convenient place to get food. You hop off the train, you walk up the stairs, you go up the escalator, you hop on the elevator, and there you go. So understand that while it's convenient, you're going to pay a premium to eat there when within a few blocks of the station, there's several different options that are more affordable. So next, 24/7 is always going to cost you extra. So anytime you see a restaurant that's 24/7, you're going to pay a premium. So if you're in the States, you're probably familiar with IHOP being a little bit pricey for what you get. It's not bad food, it's not bad service, but they charge you extra to offer this food at 2 a.m., at 3 a.m., etc. And other countries I've found are very similar. Anytime I see a restaurant that's 24/7, let's say I land in the middle of the night, or I have jet lag, so I'm waking up in the middle of the night, and I go to find food, I tend to assume that I'm going to pay extra for that convenience. And I also assume that it might not be the best tasting food. Them offering food in the middle of the night, they may have limited staff, they may have a limited amount of effort and work they can put into the food, so it just might not taste the best. And like I said, I've found this to be true in all the countries that I visited. Kind of my next tip about food, moderate your portions if you're walking a lot. So you might, in your home country when you go out to eat, you might prefer a big portion of food, but consider that if you're going to be walking a lot, you don't want to get absolutely stuffed. You don't want the biggest steak on the menu. You don't want the biggest fish fillet on the menu. You don't want multiple sandwiches. You want enough that will keep you going, but not so much that you just want to sit down and relax and not do anything. Understand that you have baseline costs when you're traveling. You've paid a certain amount for your plane ticket. You paid a certain amount for your hotel. And if you're bogged down with too much food, that's just, you prefer to enjoy your experience. But anyway, however you enjoy it. But this is just, like I said, a budget tip. My final primarily food tip is consider your local supermarkets. So regardless of what country you go to, there's going to be supermarkets, places where local people shop and get their groceries. But many of these places also have like sandwich meat. They have bread. They have some pre-made meals. One of the things that blew my mind was at least here in Japan, is the sushi at the local supermarkets. In many cases, in the hour or two before they close, they mark the sushi down quite a bit. Even before that, you might get a great deal compared to what you think, because it's pre-made. The supermarket is not having to pay staff to do dishes. They're not having to pay the extremely highly trained chefs like they would in a nice restaurant. They're not having to clean drink dispensers. You know, they just have lower costs, so they can offer a little bit better pricing. Like, I got a pretty nice tray of sushi at a local supermarket here in Kyoto for about like 980 yen or 990 yen, right under 10 bucks. That same plate, I could see I could see that same plate costing 2,000 to 2,500 yen in a sushi restaurant. Now, will it taste the same? Maybe not. Maybe it'll be, 20% less tasty, but at, less than half the price, like, I can't complain. Like, I enjoyed great sushi. I felt like I got pretty good value there. So that's something to consider. Consider your local supermarket. Understand that you can make sandwiches. If you're there to travel and you're on a budget, enjoy the food, but also understand that if you're wanting to do a lot of traveling, that the experiences are going to be a big part of that too. And I would never tell somebody to just only eat at supermarkets, but like, let's say, you do breakfast every day from a supermarket, or you do lunch, or you do dinner every day from a supermarket. Typically, dinner is more expensive than lunch at restaurants, so you might be thinking, well, you know what, I want to eat out at least once per day. I want to have a decent meal in this place that I'm going to. I'll do that at, I'll do lunch at a restaurant where I get this experience. In some cases, it's like a lot cheaper. Like, I saw one steak restaurant here in Kyoto where their lunch set is like 3,000 yen and their dinner set is like 20,000 yen. So for me, if I were to go to that restaurant, I'd go for the lunch, and then maybe do like a local curry spot or a local ramen spot for dinner that's going to cost a lot less than that 20,000 yen, about $200. So keep in mind, that's another tip I'm going to toss in there off the top of my head, that eating dinner is, generally speaking, going to be more expensive at a restaurant than eating lunch. So if there's a restaurant that you really like, you want to try, and they're open for both lunch and dinner, consider going there for lunch. You're going to have a great meal, maybe slightly smaller portions, maybe slightly lower cuts of meat, but you're going to pay a lot less. So for budget people, people on a budget, that's something to consider, and consider supplementing, breakfast, dinner with the supermarket. So moving on to drinking, I'm not a big drinker, but for the people that are, I want to give some tips. My first drinking tip is first off, be responsible. You absolutely want to be responsible when you're drinking. It doesn't matter what country you're drinking in. It doesn't matter where in the world you're drinking or what you're drinking alcohol-wise. Just be responsible. But now that I've gotten that out of the way, one thing that's popular in a lot of countries is pre-gaming. So what I mean by pre-gaming, well, it's common to drink from a local convenience store rather than to buy all of your drinks at the bar. So when I was in Thailand, I met up with a woman for going out. We were going out to this club, and one of the things I noticed, she brought her friend along, and prior to us getting to the club, she had me meet them at this 7-Eleven a block or two away, and they were drinking beers outside. Now, you want to follow local rules and laws. You cannot drink in public in the United States, but in some other countries, this is kosher. As long as you're not drinking and driving, they're not going to have a problem with you buying a beer in the 7-Eleven and drinking it out front and then finishing it off, tossing it in the trash, and then you're going. In this case, I think she paid probably a third or a fourth of what it would have cost her to get that same exact beer in the 7-Eleven or in the club. And it's in many cases the same product, similar product. So that's one thing I suggest if you're thinking about, I want to have a drinking experience in this country. Consider getting maybe you buy a 6-pack at the grocery store, at the supermarket, and you have some of them in your hotel room, and then you walk to the club. Or if you're in a country with public transportation, you take the bus or the train. You don't ever want to drink and drive ever regardless of where you are. But when it comes to saving money, you know, if you're going to pay 5x what it costs to drink, you know, from the supermarket, if you're going to pay 5x that at the bar, maybe you have plan to have half your drinks, you know, beforehand, and then you have, you know, a couple of drinks at the bar. You pay a premium, you enjoy that nice experience, you keep your, you know, the effect going. But that's something to consider. It is not just assuming that you have to have every drink at the, you know, at the club. Kind of my next drinking tip. One second to check on the time here. Okay, making good time. So for my next tip, let's see here. Read up on costs specific to the country, right? So one of the things that people may not realize is that in Japan, malt-based, basically beer drinks, are taxed at a higher rate than liquor drinks. So one of the things that's really popular in Japan, for at least for local people and people looking to drink on a budget, is they'll purchase mixed beverages. Rather than going and buying a beer that may cost 200 to 300 yen per beer, they might get a mixed drink that costs 100 to 150 yen. And it'll be a high alcohol content, but it won't be quite as expensive. Particularly if you're looking at the course of a trip, you know, if you're drinking on a regular basis throughout a trip, this can add up. So certainly keep in mind that in some countries, beer is going to be more expensive, like Japan's a good example. In other countries, liquor may be more expensive. I'm not, you know, like I said, I don't drink all that much, so I don't know of that many examples, but this is just something I read about when it comes to Japan. So do some research on that, and when it comes to taxes and local preferences, you know, as an obvious example, this will be another tip. Keep in mind that imported alcohol is probably going to be more expensive than domestic alcohol, if for no other reason that shipping costs money. So while I haven't gone out and had liquor here in Japan, I'm going to assume that liquor from the United States is going to be more expensive than Japanese liquor, at least at similar quality levels. Now, obviously, if you're buying the cheapest local liquor, that, you know, if you're buying the cheapest imported liquor, that's probably going to cost less than the most expensive local liquor. But like I said, you know, just keep in mind that different countries have different ways that they charge for alcohol, and some places just charge a lot for alcohol in general. So I haven't been to Malaysia yet, but from my understanding, alcohol is pretty expensive in Kuala Lumpur because it's they have a large Muslim population, and typically that means that they're just not as tolerant toward alcohol use. So they charge more in taxes to kind of discourage or to make extra from alcohol consumption. So keep that in mind. Local customs, you know, local preferences. Let's see here. Any other drinking only tips before we move on? So we're going to go ahead and move on to food and drink tips. So these tips are tips that I feel like apply to both food and drink budgeting. So this is kind of, you know, go ahead and start off with one that seems kind of obvious, but don't eat and drink at tourist hotspots. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you an example. Times Square in New York City is extremely popular among tourists. This is considered one of the most popular tourist destinations in the United States. When you go to New York City, you know, you see the bright lights in Times Square. Ironic because it used to be considered a dangerous, sketchy place, but nowadays it's super popular. But if you were to go and have a meal and have drinks at Times Square in New York City, you're going to pay a lot of money. I presume it's the same way in London near like Big Ben. At these different tourist hotspots, understand that the real estate is going to be more expensive. So the business owners that own these businesses in these areas have to pay more in terms of rental costs. Typically, they're going to have to pay their employees more because their employees may not be able to afford to live nearby. You know, so if you're a waiter at Times Square, you may not be able to afford to live in Manhattan. You know, they may have people coming in from like Brooklyn and Queens, And those people are going to expect more money for the commute, and they're going to expect more money to pay for the train. And so these costs are going to be transmuted onto the consumer. So keep in mind, if you're at a tourist hotspot, similar to what I was talking earlier about the train station, that you're going to probably end up paying more. So my tip there is, if you're at a tourist hotspot, if you can wait, if you think you can wait, maybe even 15 extra minutes, 30 extra minutes, go for a short walk. Figure out where you are, get your GPS going so you don't get lost. But walk 2, 3, 4 blocks away, and you might run into some of the best meals you've had at a fraction of the price that you would have paid at the tourist destination. You're unlikely, if you're somebody that likes to meet locals and likes to interact with locals, you're probably not going to meet locals in Times Square, except for the people that have to walk through there on their commute. You're probably not going to walk into a bar full of locals that love hanging out in Times Square. But if you go several blocks away, you may find these businesses that are more popular and people that live in the area. You may have that opportunity to practice your different language skills. You may get a chance to have locals suggest different dishes to you. And like in the case of some tourist destinations, you may only see restaurants that you're familiar with around the tourist destination, whereas if you walk several blocks away, you can discover something new. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're from the United States, you probably had McDonald's before. You probably don't want to eat McDonald's. Not because it's bad, but because if you've gone halfway around the world, you may try it once or twice, but you probably don't want to eat it, for every meal. So yeah, so that's something that I kind of throw out there as a tip is, don't eat or drink at the tourist hotspot. Be willing to walk several blocks away to get something. That's if you're not, having a health concern related to being hungry. So you got the time, try that. Next, what do we got next? Know your limit when it comes to food and drink. So one issue I've had in Japan is I want to eat everything. I mean, literally everything, almost everything that I see, I want to try it. But the problem is I have a limited amount of space in my stomach. So I cannot eat every single thing that I want to eat. That I see. And not only can I not fit it all in my stomach, but if I were to eat everything that I saw that piqued my interest, I mean, I'd spend hundreds of dollars a day on food. So there have been a few dishes where I just, bought a bunch of different things and stuck them all in my backpack, brought them back to the hotel, put them in the fridge, and ate a few different things, and then realized, man, I'm full. I don't have the room to eat all of these things. And so a couple of things got older than I wanted to eat them at, and a couple of things got a little bit stale, and that stinks, understand your limit. Understand your limit when it comes to food. Understanding you can only eat so much food, and to be kind of measured in what you buy. And then same with alcohol. You absolutely want to drink responsibly. Don't drink more than you can handle. You don't want to get sick and end up spending a whole day of your trip hungover, laying in your hotel bed. Understand that there's going to be plenty more times to have drinks, and that you don't need to overdo it and get yourself hurt or make dumb decisions. These are things to keep in mind. So moderate your alcohol consumption. I think that moderating your food and alcohol consumption can definitely be savers when it comes to your budget. What else? Okay, so kind of slightly related to accommodation, but definitely focused on food and drink. Understand that hotels tend to have expensive food and drink. That usually is part of their business model. That's usually part of how they make a profit, is that they count on being able to sell food and drink to a certain portion of their guests. So I remember in the Philippines, I could get a bottle of water like this for roughly 30 pesos. But on my last night, the hotel I stayed at, I bought a bottle of water from their little, it's kind of a restaurant cafe, thinking, oh, it'll probably be cheap. It'll probably be 10 pesos like it is at the convenience store, maybe 12 pesos. It was 30 pesos. I paid 30 pesos for a bottle of water this big, and the water didn't taste all that great. When I could have gone to the local convenience store and gotten a much bigger bottle of water for that same price. So, same with meals. I had one hotel I stayed at for one night, and I didn't put up a video about this spot, but I'm going to walk toward my room, and the front desk guy stops me and says, "Hey, Alexander, what are we going to make for you tomorrow morning?" And I thought, what do you mean, what are you going to make for me tomorrow morning? I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Oh, breakfast, what will you be having?" And I said, "Do you charge a fee for that?" "Well, yeah." "Well, I'm not interested." And he looked like I had hurt his feelings, like, "Oh, what do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, I don't want to, I don't want to pay for that. I don't want that." And it turned out to be relatively expensive, like two or 300 pesos, and not expensive like in terms of my budget or preferences. But I typically don't eat breakfast anyway, so whatever it would have been, if I didn't like it, I would have I would have spent that money and not really gotten value out of it, and that's just something to consider. Now in certain Western or more developed countries, you could pay a lot more for that. I mean, I remember going to New York City with my grandma and her partner at the time, like almost 20 years ago, and they wanted something like, I think it was like $20 or $25 for a bowl of oatmeal, which is ridiculous. I mean, that's a lot. You can get a steak in many parts of the United States nowadays for that kind of price. I know at various hotels that I've been to, the food tends to be very expensive. So if you're on a budget, consider walking down the block and finding something in the general neighborhood of your hotel rather than counting on them for your meals. I understand in some cases you're really tired, you just want room service, and I have no judgment for people that are looking to spend a bit more for that type of experience. But for budget travelers, people that are being that have more concerns about their money in relation to budgeting for the trip, keep in mind that if you eat in your hotel, if you drink in your hotel, you're probably going to pay a hefty premium for that sort of privilege. So kind of moving on here. Okay. So consider that major cities are always going to charge more for food and alcohol. So if you're somebody that's going to go to, well, Japan is a good example because I'm here in Japan. Keep in mind that on this trip, I actually am not going to Tokyo. A lot of people are really surprised. They're saying, "Alex, how could you miss Tokyo?" Well, I plan to come back to Japan. So on my next trip to Japan, I plan on going to Tokyo. I could see myself spending as much as a month in Tokyo because I absolutely love Japan. I mean, this country is blowing my mind. But keep in mind, Tokyo is going to be more expensive than Osaka. Tokyo is going to be more expensive than Kyoto. Tokyo is going to be more expensive than Fukuoka. These are the three cities that I'm primarily visiting on this trip. And I did so knowing that my yen is going to go farther in these places. So if you're a budget-oriented traveler, keep in mind that if you're going to the capital city of a country, like let's say you want to go to Russia, if you're going to spend the whole trip in Moscow, you're probably going to pay a premium for food and drink. If you're going to the UK, you spend the whole trip in London, you're probably going to pay more for food and drink. This is, especially true in countries without a street food scene. There are a lot of countries that don't have a street food scene where, like in Bangkok is probably an exception to this, where you can get cheap street food. But in the case of sit-down restaurants, once again, you're probably going to pay more in that city than you would in, say, Chiang Mai. This also goes for islands, right? So if I'm in Thailand, I'm probably going to pay more on like a Koh Tao, than I would at Chiang Mai. Same in Philippines. I definitely paid more in many cases in Camaguin, or the same price for less quality food or less smaller portions. I've definitely paid a lot and Kamigan, just because it's an island compared to, in some cases, Cebu. So keep in mind that just because you're in what seems to be a rural or less populated area than a major city, if it's an island, you're probably going to pay more for the cost of shipping the food to that island. So if you're looking to be on a budget, keep in mind you may not want to pick a remote island. Like, that's part of what makes Japan expensive, is that there are a lot of things that do have to be shipped here, and that increases the cost substantially, because you're not only are you paying for whatever good or service good it is, you're also paying for the fuel costs, the transportation costs, the labor of transporting it. All these things add up. And kind of another tip on location. Airlines are going to charge more for food. You know, if you want to buy a snack on the airplane, you're going to pay more for the convenience. If you want to buy food, trying to think of another example, like on a train, you're probably going to pay more for the convenience. Finally, this is my final tip when it comes to being on a budget. Understand the law of diminishing returns. So what I mean by the law of diminishing returns, what I mean by that is you're often going to pay substantially more money for smaller incremental improvements in quality. So what I mean by that is the difference between a $20 and $40 bottle of alcohol might be significant. You might feel like the $40 bottle is significantly higher quality, but you know, can you tell the difference between, say, a $100 bottle of alcohol and a $200 bottle of alcohol? Now, certainly connoisseurs of alcohol could probably tell the difference, and maybe the layperson can pretty easily tell the difference too. But you have to think, is it worth it? I feel this way about steak. Now and then I enjoy a good steak. Can I really tell a massive major difference between a $25 steak and a $35 steak? You know, I don't know. For somebody on a budget like me, I'm not always concerned with getting the absolute highest quality. A good example of this is with pork, with the tonkatsu. I recently have, in Japan, eaten quite a bit of tonkatsu. And at one point I was at a market and they had a fairly expensive, by my standards, a small pork sandwich for about 600 yen, about $6. And I thought, man, for a similar price, I get like a big bowl at the local restaurant. But I thought, you know what, I need to try it. It looks really good. I'm sure it'll taste really good. Amazing. It tasted amazing. I mean, it was really, really good. But it was a relatively small portion. You know, I was hungry after, so I ended up buying more food. So keep in mind, when you're on a budget, don't always go for the top quality just because you've got an itch to try something. Now, did I feel like it was worth it? Certainly. But out of the 10 or so, maybe 15 experiences with tonkatsu I'll have on this trip, that'll probably be the only one where I pay that premium, because I'd rather have a little bit more volume so that I'm not buying a bunch of different things. Now, once again, if you're not on a budget, you want to try the best of the best, I don't blame you, go for it. But if you're like me, you're trying to be cautious about how much you spend, keep in mind that the top quality might not always be worth 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x the price. Like when it comes to beef here, I've been looking at a few different restaurants to have a nice steak one night while I'm here for maybe 5,000 yen. Now, is there a difference between that steak that's 5,000 yen and another steak that's, say, 25,000 yen? Certainly. There's certainly a difference. But is it worth 5x the price? Maybe not for somebody like me. And in fact, I was reading one person talking about the difference between A4 and A5 Wagyu, and they recommended, and several people recommended, don't go for the A5. It's too buttery. It's too sort of greasy tasting. Go for the A4. You're probably going to prefer the flavor of it. So that's something to keep. And speaking of price, the A4 was 4,500 yen, whereas the A5 was like 6,500 yen. So that's like almost a $20 price difference. And people felt like the slightly lower quality product tasted better. So keep in mind the law of diminishing returns when it comes to both food and alcohol. Having the absolute premium of the premium may not be worth it to you. You have to determine whether or not you have the palate and the appreciation for that product to always go for the more expensive product. At the current time, I don't feel that I do. So that's kind of my final tip. I want to thank you for joining me. If you enjoy this video, if it was informative, give me a thumbs up. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Maybe you agree or disagree with some of what I've said. I want to hear it. And if you have any questions, definitely let us know down in the comments. I'll try to answer them. And I just want to do as much as I can to inform people about what I know about traveling. All that being said, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.